Hello, my name is Alice Bishrey, and this is my presentation for the Your Music, Your Business module in Term 1. I've chosen the title The Rise of the Hobbyist, and we'll be discussing whether this is a sustainable future for music. So, the phonograph was the first piece of equipment that could record a piece of audio successfully, and it would eventually lead to the start of the recording industry. So it was invented in 1877 by Thomas Edison, and how it works is that it has a horn which collects the sound, and the vibrations make a diaphragm vibrate, which causes a needle to inscribe grooves on a cylinder, which then rotates and plays a sound back. So Thomas Edison, when he invented it, had several insightful visions of what it could be used for. So the first one was writing letters. So it would be an alternative to a written letter. You could send a recording in some form. They ended up rather than having tinfoil, having wax cylinders again instead. So rather than tinfoil, it was wax. So if they were to send it, it might have been in that, or may have been tape or anything. And now we have smartphones where you can send audio messages very easily, and people do that a lot. So that does hold true today to some extent. Phonographic books, which obviously we have now as audiobooks, and a lot of them are available, and it was originally, his intention was for it to be for blind people, which it is now, but also people who can see also use them because it's just a nice alternative to reading. Another one was family records, so sayings and voice recordings of loved ones to keep as a memento, maybe after they passed away, so you can still have their voice. And today we still have our smartphones to record funny or memorable things that our friends and family does, and I'm sure we all have that on our phones. So that one again does to an extent hold true. And he also predicted that it could be used for music boxes and toys, which is also the case because we have lots of toys such as Build-A-Bears or Furbies that have little recordings in them and say things. So that kind of contributed a lot to like the children's toy industry. Another one was clocks that announce what you should be doing at different times of the day, which isn't really used widely, but we have alarms on our phones which have been recorded at some point down the line. So I guess that's applicable. And then there is also various telecare devices, which allow elderly, disabled people, maybe someone with Alzheimer's, to remember to drink water or take their medication or eat their meals. We also have like the Alexa and Google Dot, which are in a sense a bit like that. Another one is recording phone calls, which we have now with voicemails, obviously, and then the police can access phone records, or we do that today. So that one definitely holds true. And the last one was educational purposes, recording classes, which happens widely now because we have remote teaching because of the pandemic. But I've had in the past teachers say that you can record class if you want to catch up on it later or in a lecture. That's an option that is available, and I imagine it's been used in other forms of remote teaching over the last 100 years since we've had recordings. So moving on, the digital age of recording is what I'm going to be mainly focusing on, because it's when recording was made a lot easier, and it's when it enables a lot more recording techniques and was a lot faster than recording on analog tape. So we've come a very long way in terms of recording in general since the phonograph. But the beginnings of digital recording started with digital pulse code modulation. And the first system used for this was Sig Sally, which was a computer, this one here, which was used to allow the Allied forces in the war to talk to each other. But this wasn't really commercially viable or able to be used for music, really, because the audio quality wouldn't have been good enough. It would have only been good enough to allow someone to have a conversation, not to have a listenable track. So that was developed in 1943. Fast forward to 1969, a Japanese company, NHK, released a digital stereo recorder, which was 13-bit and had a 32 hertz sampling rate. So that's not very high and not very good audio quality still, but it was the start of using it obviously it's a lot smaller than this one, and it was the start of being able to record music, essentially. And later on, the Japanese company Denon released an improvement of this, and this one was actually very important because it was smaller. First of all, it had 8 channels, which allows for multi-track recording and overdubs, which makes the recording process a lot easier. And it could also record onto CD eventually. Fast forward to today, and we have these very simple, like very cheap, well, not exactly cheap, but we have these very readily available pieces of digital recording equipment. Most people have access to a computer or a laptop, and here's the Focusrite Scarlett 212, which is a small, cheap interface that you can use to record any instrument into your laptop. There are various digital audio workstations, some of which are free. You can, with a keyboard, you can access a library of sounds. You can plug in your guitar and your microphone, and we have like thousands and thousands of plugins, probably hundreds of thousands of plugins available to manipulate audio in any way that you could want, really. So I've skipped out a lot of the recording of a lot of the progress, but essentially we've come from very simple low bit rate recording technology that took up a lot of space and was very expensive to now where anyone for a few £100 could set up a home recording studio and have access to manipulate sounds and however they want, and it doesn't take up very much space, and it's just a lot more modern. So so moving on from recording to actual audio formats and how we listen to music rather than how we record it. Originally, going back to when we had the phonograph, there were these wax cylinders, so the needle would record the audio by inscribing through the vibrations onto these. Then the wax would be set with some sort of chemical that would make it so it didn't scratch or anything. And yeah, then that was the first available way of owning a recording. And after the war, they were made available as vinyl. And it started off as the 7-inch ones, and then it went to the 10-inch ones, which had 78 rotations per minute, so that's more information. And then it went to the 12-inch diameter ones, which were just sounded better. So this raised a slight legal issue, just going back slightly. Now that recordings are available to buy and sell, it's a question of who's entitled to the royalties. And at the time, it was, because recordings weren't very good, it was the person who'd written the actual sheet music who was entitled to the royalties. But that was before production value really added a lot to a track. Now, like, I think a lot can be said about a track in its production value rather than just the instrumentation and the songwriting aspect of it. So yeah, initially people, when these came out, people valued the sheet music and the live experience more than the actual recording, because it didn't sound great, because you didn't have all the multi-tracks things or EQ or compression or anything like that. It was just straight onto these. Bear with me a second. Yes, so after that, we had cassette tape, which were an advantage over vinyl because they're smaller, and probably cheaper as well. Well, they were cheaper because they're just a small piece of plastic with 2 tapes in it. Even if the sound quality was compromised a little bit, and obviously with the vinyl you get a big beautiful piece of artwork come with it. With a cassette tape, not so much. They're not so pretty to look at, but they did allow people to have portable music for the first time, so they could have it in the car or use a Walkman, a little box with the aux cable for headphones that you could walk around with. So I think that probably made music more personal, and had an effect on young people and allowed them to develop their own music taste independent of their family. If you can imagine, before you just had one record player and a few records that probably the parents decided what they were. Now these are probably a lot cheaper than vinyl, and you can walk around with it and have it yourself and listen to it yourself, so you can listen to what music you like if you're a teenager. So after that, the CD became the dominant music format. So as well as being portable, just like with cassette tape, you can fit a lot more information on it. It doesn't risk the tape bit getting tangled, so it's a lot more practical, although they can get scratched, but as long as you take care of them, it's not so bad. And then after that, MP3s came around. MP3 came around actually in the late 1980s. So this is a file format which is just digital, there's no physical aspect to it, and it enables recordings to be compressed to a small size, so you can send them around over the internet mainly, or over a memory stick or hard drive. And they're basically, even though some of the audio quality is compromised, like with a CD you have a WAV file which can fit a lot more information. An MP3 is smaller, but it's a lot more practical because you can fit a lot of them onto like one iPod or anything. So then in the early 2000s, the iPod was released, and around that same time we saw the emergence of Napster, which was a file sharing site where you could download MP3s and upload them for free, essentially. But this was illegal because there was a lot of actual like recorded songs from bands on there that were getting shared around for free, and people hadn't paid for them. So even though it was a very common practice, and it's very hard to enforce people to not do it. And it did raise a lot of criticism. Famously, Metallica got very angry about it and had a lot to say about Napster and illegal streaming. And there's a big debate about whether it's okay. But soon after, in 2001, Apple released iTunes, which is an online store which today enables you to purchase them for 99p or something, songs for 99p, and ringtones and podcasts and everything. And then you could have them on your iPod or phone. And this is, even though you could pay for them, at least it was legal and actually supporting the artist. So that was good. And years later, in 2009, with the launch of the iPhone, even though Spotify hadn't really become that well known around 2009, with smartphones, most people now use Spotify or SoundCloud. So Spotify is a subscription-based service, and you pay £10 a month and you have unlimited access to any music, or any music that's been uploaded onto it, which is most things you can think of. Some artists have taken their music off of Spotify because they don't get very much money from it, so they don't want to be on there, and they don't maybe not agree with it. But there are other ones like Apple Music and Deezer and other streaming services, but Spotify is the one that is most dominant out of all of them. SoundCloud as well is another one that I wanted to mention, because it's like Spotify, and there is a paid version, but it operates more like a social media site than delivering like a finished product. Like, you can release demos and unfinished pieces and build up an online portfolio of your own work that's just random things going together. It's more for that, whereas Spotify is more for releasing a finished product. And there are a lot of artists that have become famous through SoundCloud, and then all their work is on Spotify. But a lot of the work, there is a lot of things such as artists such as Lil Peep. There is a lot of stuff that is still on his SoundCloud that hasn't been released on Spotify. So it's more community based and has less professional stuff on it. With Spotify, if you want to release something on Spotify, they will check it to make sure it's legit, and you'll probably most likely go through a distribution service such as DistroKid to get your music on there. Whereas SoundCloud, it's quick and easy to upload anything to there. So moving on, all of this considered, how has it affected the music industry, and will the increase in hobbyists and bedroom artists create a sustainable future? So I've chosen two artists. One is Clover Cop and one is Girl in Red, and they're both young women artists who do most of their production and songwriting and everything themselves. Clover Cop's only been rapping for about a year. She's a rapper, and she's managed to get quite big through playlists, getting on playlists on Spotify. There are people that organise playlists that you can get on, so people discover your work easier. And this girl does everything herself, all the production, everything. So this is because recording equipment is easier to use, cheaper, and more readily available, as I discussed earlier. Many more people have access to a laptop or computer, and there are a lot of options of digital audio workstations, some of which are free. It's also possible to access a library of sounds, including real instruments and synth sounds. There is like an abundance of plugins to manipulate any sounds and basically make anything you want from your computer. And the streaming services such as SoundCloud and Spotify have allowed artists to make their work available to the public, because most people now have a phone with access to the internet, whereas in the past, if you wanted people to hear your music, you would either have to play it live at a gig, give someone your CD or tape, which they might probably 9 times out of 10 might not get around to listening to. Plus, if you're playing live at a gig, the only people seeing it are the people there, whereas on the internet, potentially anyone could see your music. Or you'd have to have your music sold in a record store or have it played on the radio, which obviously doesn't have as much of a reach as the internet does, because you can find pretty much any music you want by just, the algorithms in Spotify will play music that you want. There's so much out there now. It's because of this that the industry has seen the emergence of more DIY artists, and a lot more of them are becoming successful. And we have terms such as lo-fi and SoundCloud rapper and bedroom pop, which aren't limited to any particular style or genre, but because the recording techniques aren't 100% professional, the production style, I think, can be very understated and even a bit messy, but I think this has become an attribute of the style. The DIY approach also creates a space where artists aren't limited by record company contracts or producers pulling them in different directions. It's a lot easier to make it as an artist without being in a record contract. a lot more artists are doing it themselves nowadays. And I think because of this, it's we get more music. Oh wait, what part? Yeah, so I think that this type of music, understated, kind of spaced out, messily produced pop, is a reaction against the overproduced pop that gets marketed towards young people a lot of the time with all the big producers and big labels. And I think it's quite similar to how punk was a reaction against prog rock and how that was very complicated, and how punk was saying was going against that by just keeping it simple. I think people get sick of things being overcomplicated and too perfect. So I think a lot of the time we get reactions against that in the music industry. So is all of this sustainable, which is the question. So there's no doubt that the overwhelming amount of content on the internet has diluted the market. So it's a lot harder to get recognised because there's so much out there. But at the same time, I think that means that it pushes artists to be more original and more creative. So I think in the last few years, I've seen a lot more interesting artists, like DIY artists, come out of the woodwork, and they're all very unique. A lot of them. I think if you don't have something that's original, or if you don't create a brand that's interesting, like I think these two artists have, then you're not going to gain any attention, which is a good thing for the listener because it means that there's a more variety of music to listen to. However, I think it is very easy to just nowadays just to buy the rights to a beat and a sample and play a few notes and rap not very well over it. So now there's a lot of that kind of stuff out there, which I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. It's just there's a lot of it, and a lot of it all sounds the same, which is tiresome and makes it very difficult for people to become recognised who actually have a lot of talent and originality. So to conclude, I think that with all the progressions from the big clunky digital recording things to CD and tape, and then coming back to like new ways of recording, and it being very easy, not easy, but very readily available. I think that in a way it's improved the music industry, and I think it will be sustainable, and I think we will find a way around it and it will work itself out in the end, but it does at the same time make things a lot more difficult. So yes, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye. Oh no. Okay. Yes. Goodbye.